The cold came early that year, creeping down from the mountains like a living thing. It settled into bones and memories alike, pressing against every cabin wall along the forgotten trails. Snow lay heavy around the old west town of Pine Hollow, muting the sound of hooves and voices, leaving only the wind to tell its stories. It was the kind of place where people learned to endure or disappear, where frontier life stripped a soul down to what it truly was. She stood just beyond the cabin door, wrapped in a worn blanket that had once belonged to someone long gone. Her breath came shallow, each rise of her chest careful, guarded. Blood had dried along her temple, dark against pale skin, and one eye was already swelling shut. When she spoke, her voice barely carried over the sigh of the wind. "My ribs are already broken," she whispered, not as a plea, but as a fact. Pain was an old companion out here. The man behind her did not answer right away. He had learned silence the hard way. He stood tall and still, a lone cowboy shaped by years of western survival, his coat dusted with snow, his hat pulled low. The firelight from the cabin caught the lines in his face, lines carved by sun, loss, and choices he could not undo. When he finally moved, it was slow, careful, as if any sudden motion might shatter what little steadiness remained between them. He placed his arms around her anyway. Outside, the old west town slept uneasily. Pine Hollow had been built by hands chasing gold, land, or forgiveness, depending on who you asked. Most had found none of it. A few stayed because they had nowhere else to go. The rest were buried along the trail or scattered across the plains like forgotten promises. She leaned back into him despite herself. It hurt, and they both knew it, but the cold hurt worse. Loneliness worst of all. He had found her at the edge of the trees just before dusk, half-conscious and stubbornly alive. No horse, no supplies. Just footprints in the snow, leading nowhere good. He had recognized the marks on her boots, the beadwork along the torn hem of her dress, signs of a Native American tale woven deep into her past. She was not from Pine Hollow, but the land had claimed her all the same. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked softly. Shadows danced along the walls, touching old scars carved into the logs by other winters, other hands. A child's wooden toy lay near the hearth, untouched for years. The man's eyes lingered on it for a moment before he turned away. This was not meant to be a Wild West love story, not yet. Out here, affection was a dangerous thing, something that could make a person careless. Yet, as he held her through the pain, something quiet and heavy settled in his chest, a feeling he had sworn never to invite again. She closed her eyes, fighting the tremble in her breath. Every inhale scraped against broken ribs, but she did not pull away. She had survived worse. She had crossed rivers that stole children from their mothers, watched smoke rise where homes once stood, and followed trails that led only to grief. The frontier had taught her endurance, but not trust. "Don't," she murmured, though she did not say what she meant. "Don't care. Don't stay. Don't make this harder than it already was." He heard it anyway. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant howl of something hungry. Or maybe it was just the land reminding them both that nothing here was gentle. Not the winters, not the people, not the love that sometimes bloomed in the most broken places. He tightened his grip just enough to keep her upright, careful not to press against her injuries. He could feel how thin she was beneath the blanket, how light, as if the world had already taken more than its share from her. His jaw clenched, not with anger, but with the knowledge that this moment would not pass without consequence. Somewhere beyond the trees, the trail she had come from waited in silence. Somewhere ahead, a choice hovered, unspoken, unresolved. And between them, in that small cabin on the edge of nowhere, something fragile took root, even as the storm gathered strength. She did not know his name yet. He did not know hers. But the frontier had a way of binding strangers together, whether they wished it or not. The fire burned lower as night claimed the sky, and neither of them moved to stop what was beginning. The cabin had not always been his. It had belonged to a man who laughed easily and trusted the land too much. That man had come west with a woman and a small child, chasing a promise whispered in old west towns from Missouri to the high plains. The promise had outlived them. The cabin remained, weathered and patient, a shelter for whoever the trail delivered next. He had taken it over without ceremony, fixing the roof, mending the door, never speaking their names aloud. The wooden toy by the hearth stayed where it was, a quiet reminder that frontier life spared no one. When he looked at the woman now resting against him, the memory stirred, unwelcome and sharp. He guided her to a chair near the fire, lowering her slowly. She hissed through her teeth but did not cry out. Pride was another survival skill. He knelt in front of her, his movements steady, practiced. Broken ribs were not new to him. Neither were wounds that went unseen. "Snowstorm's coming," he said at last, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. "Trail won't be passable till morning. Maybe longer." She opened her one good eye and studied him. Men had looked at her before with hunger, with fear, with judgment. This man looked at her as if she were already part of the land he guarded. It unsettled her. "Morning's a long way off," she replied. He nodded. He knew. She had come from a settlement farther north, one already thinning under pressure from soldiers, traders, and a winter that showed no mercy. Her people had learned to move when the land turned against them, but this time movement had not been enough. There had been shouting, confusion, a blow she never saw coming. Then the trees, the snow, and the long stumbling walk that ended here. She did not tell him any of this. Not yet. Instead she asked, "Why help me?" The question hung between them, heavier than the smoke curling toward the rafters. In an Old West town, help was rarely free. Kindness came with expectations or danger close behind. He considered lying; it would have been easier. But the frontier had taught him the cost of easy words. "Didn't see anyone else on the trail," he said. "Didn't sit right, leaving you." She looked away, toward the door, as if measuring how quickly she could leave once she was able. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, neither could he. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the cabin walls. Somewhere beyond Pine Hollow, forces were already moving, men who did not forget debts. Lines drawn between cultures that could not be erased by a single act of mercy. The land itself, patient and unforgiving, waiting to see who would endure this season. He stood and added another log to the fire. Sparks leapt, brief and bright, before fading into ash. When he turned back, she was watching the flames, her face caught between pain and memory. She whispered something in her own tongue, a prayer or a warning, he could not tell. Whatever tomorrow brought, neither of them would leave unchanged. The storm was coming, and with it truths that could no longer stay buried along the forgotten trails. The night pressed closer, wrapping the cabin in a hush that felt almost deliberate. Snow slid from the roof in soft sighs, as if the land itself were listening. The fire settled into a steady glow, casting long shadows that stretched and retreated with every shift of flame. He stayed near the hearth, pretending to tend the fire, giving her space without leaving her alone. She sat stiffly, the blanket drawn tight, her body angled as though ready to rise and flee at the first wrong word. Pain lived in every careful movement. It reminded her she was still here. That mattered. He noticed how her eyes kept drifting to the door, measuring distance, weighing strength. She had the look of someone who had learned early that safety never lasted. Frontier life taught that lesson fast, especially to those born between worlds. The man had been born to the trail, though not by choice. His father had ridden west with a wagon train that broke apart before reaching the plains. Fever took half of them. The rest scattered. He grew up moving from ranch to ranch, learning how to fix fences, break horses, and mind his own business. When he was old enough, he stopped asking why people vanished overnight. In an Old West town, explanations were rare and often useless. The woman across from him carried her own silence. Her mother had taught her which roots healed and which killed, how to read the sky before storms, how to listen when the land spoke. Her father had taught her to stand her ground. Both lessons had saved her life more than once. Neither had prepared her for the way the world was closing in now, squeezing her people between broken treaties and colder winters. She shifted, her breath catching despite her effort to hide it. He moved instinctively, then stopped himself. Helping too much could be taken the wrong way. Out here, trust had to be earned inch by inch. You don't have to stay awake, he said quietly. Fire'll keep. She studied him again, searching for something she could name. Sleep makes a person weak, she replied. He nodded. So does never sleeping. A faint curve touched her mouth, not quite a smile. It faded quickly. He took that as permission to sit on the edge of the table, close enough to help if needed, far enough not to crowd her. The wooden toy by the hearth caught her eye then. She frowned slightly. "Yours?" she asked. "No," he said too quickly. Then, after a pause, "Belonged to someone who isn't here anymore." She did not press. Loss recognized loss without words. In her own past, there were small things left behind too. A beaded pouch buried beneath a cottonwood. A song no one sang anymore. Broken promises scattered like bones along the trail. Outside, a horse snorted softly. He stiffened. His hand drifted toward the rifle resting against the wall, though he did not lift it. The sound came again, closer this time. "Do you expect trouble?" she asked. "Trouble's always around," he said. "Question is whether it's looking for us." Pine Hollow sat in a narrow valley, hemmed in by trees and rock. It had been chosen because it was easy to defend, or so the founders claimed. What they meant was that it was hard to escape. Traders passed through, soldiers sometimes followed, and with them came rules that shifted like sand. She knew what uniforms meant. She had seen how words like order and protection were used to justify taking land and children. Her ribs ached not only from the beating, but from the memory of hands that did not ask permission. The cabin creaked as the wind pushed harder. Snow began to fall in earnest, thick and blinding. Whatever waited beyond the door would have to wait until morning, if morning came at all. He poured water into a tin cup and held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, but it lingered, sending a quiet awareness through them both. He looked away first. "You didn't ask my name," she said. "You didn't offer it," another almost smile. "Names have power, so I've heard." She sipped carefully, then lowered the cup. "People call me what they can manage." He accepted that. Names could bind or break a person. He had shed his own once, along with the life that came before this valley. Beyond the cabin, the trail she had traveled wound north toward lands that no longer felt like home. South lay towns that saw her as a problem to be solved. Staying here meant being caught between both. Leaving meant facing the storm alone. He rose and checked the door, sliding the heavy bar into place. "If anyone comes," he said, "I'll handle it." She met his gaze. "You don't know who might be looking for me." "I know enough," he replied. "You're hurt." "That's reason enough." The words surprised them both. He turned away, busying himself with a pot of beans warming over the fire. Routine steadied him. It reminded him of nights spent guarding cattle, of meals shared under open skies with men who never spoke of the past. Some had ridden on. Some had not. She watched him work, noting how he favored one shoulder, how his eyes never fully relaxed. He was a man shaped by waiting, waiting for seasons to turn, waiting for memories to dull, waiting for something he could not name. Her chest tightened, though she did not know why. Perhaps because she recognized that waiting. She had lived in it too, listening for footsteps that might never come, hoping and fearing at the same time. When he handed her a bowl, she accepted it with a quiet nod. Their fingers brushed again, longer this time. Neither spoke. Outside, voices drifted faintly through the snow. Not close enough to hear words, but close enough to be real. He froze. The bowl trembled slightly in her hands. "Friends of yours?" she asked softly. "No," he said, the silence stretched. The fire popped, sending a spark upward. Somewhere, a horse stamped, impatient. The land held its breath. Whatever had driven her to his door was not finished yet. And whatever he had buried beneath this cabin floor, beneath years of quiet survival, was beginning to stir. The storm would keep them here for now, bound together by necessity and pain. But morning would bring choices. And choices, in the Wild West, always came with a price neither of them was ready to pay. Morning did not arrive cleanly. It crept in behind the storm, pale and uncertain, as if unsure it was welcome. Snow packed itself against the cabin walls, sealing them in. The valley lay buried under a white silence that bent sound and distance, making everything feel closer and farther all at once. He woke before the light fully formed, the habit of years pulling him from sleep. For a moment he forgot she was there. Then he heard her breathing, shallow but steady, and memory returned like a weight settling across his chest. She slept in the chair near the fire, wrapped tight, her dark hair loose around her face. In sleep, the sharp guard she carried softened. Pain still marked her brow, still pulled at her ribs with every breath, but exhaustion had finally claimed her. He watched her longer than he should have. He had seen many people pass through Pine Hollow, drifters, traitors, men running from law or loss. Very few stayed. Fewer still mattered. He told himself she was no different. The storm would pass. She would heal enough to leave. That was how the frontier worked. Yet when she stirred and winced awake, his body moved before his thoughts caught up. "Easy," he said, kneeling beside her. Her eyes flew open, sharp despite the fog of pain. It took a breath for recognition to settle. She did not pull away, but her shoulders tensed. "I dreamed I was back on the river," she murmured. "Ice breaking underfoot." He nodded. "Happens." She studied his face again, as if looking for cracks. "You don't ask many questions. Questions don't always get answers," he replied. "That hasn't stopped people before." "No," he agreed. "It hasn't." He helped her drink, careful, steady. The closeness felt heavier in daylight. Last night had been shadows and firelight. Morning stripped things bare. She could see the scar along his jaw now, the old burn on his hand. He could see the quiet fury she carried beneath her stillness. Outside, the voices from the night before returned, closer now. Boots crunched through snow. A man laughed, sharp and careless. She stiffened. "They followed me." His jaw tightened. "How many?" "Enough." He stood and reached for his coat. "You stay here." She grabbed his sleeve, her grip weaker than she meant. "If they see you helping me, they won't stop with questions." He looked down at her hand, then met her eyes. They won't stop anyway. That truth sat between them. Out here, choosing a side was rarely a single moment. It was a series of small acts that added up to something final. He cracked the door just enough to look out. 3 men stood near the tree line, their horses tied carelessly. They wore the look of those who believed the land owed them obedience. One carried a rifle slung loose, more threat than necessity. "Cabins occupied," one of them called. "We're looking for a woman." Silence followed. Snow fell from a branch overhead, soft but loud in the stillness. "She passed through here?" the man pressed. He stepped outside then, closing the door behind him. The cold bit hard. "Plenty of folks pass through," he said evenly. "Storm's been wiping tracks clean since nightfall." The men exchanged glances. They did not like uncertainty. They liked answers that bent their way. "She's hurt," another said. "Stole something that doesn't belong to her." Inside the cabin, she listened, her heart hammering. Stolen. That was the word they always used. As if land, as if people could belong to men who arrived late and loud. Her ribs screamed as she stood. She pressed a hand to the wall, steadying herself. Running was not an option. Hiding had limits. She had learned that lesson too well. Outside, the man at the door felt the weight of the choice he was making settle deeper. He could tell them she was not there, they might leave, or they might search anyway. If they found her, his silence would mean nothing. "You're welcome to move along," he said. "Storm's not done yet." The rifle shifted. A smile appeared that did not reach the eyes. "We'll take a look." Inside, she reached for the knife tucked into her boot, fingers brushing worn leather. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Stand your ground, but know when the ground is already lost." The door opened. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then their eyes found her. "There you are," the man said, satisfaction thick in his voice. She lifted her chin despite the pain. "You have no claim on me." He laughed. "You hear that? Still thinks she gets a say." The man from the cabin stepped between them without raising his voice or his weapon. "She's not going anywhere today." The silence that followed was dangerous. It was the kind that preceded bloodshed or surrender. Neither came easily. "You making this your business?" the leader asked. He did not answer right away. He thought of the toy by the hearth, of winters survived alone, of all the times he had stepped aside and told himself it wasn't his fight. "Yes," he said at last. The word changed everything. The men did not draw their guns, not yet. They measured him instead, weighing cost against reward. Outside forces shaped their choices too. Orders waiting to be followed. Eyes watching from town. This isn't finished, the leader said finally. You're choosing trouble, I know, he replied. They backed away slowly, never turning their backs until the trees swallowed them again. The door closed. The cabin felt smaller now. She sagged against the table, breath shaking. He was at her side in an instant, steadying her. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Maybe, he said. But I did. Her eyes searched his face, confusion and something warmer tangled together. Why? He struggled for an answer that would not sound foolish. Because leaving you to them felt worse? The admission hung between them, fragile as thin ice. She swallowed. They won't stop, I know. Outside, the storm began to ease, but the tension did not. Somewhere, plans were being made, lines drawn tighter. The land watched, indifferent and eternal. Inside the cabin, they sat close, closer than before, bound by a choice neither could undo. Love, if that was what this might become, felt possible in that quiet space. It also felt like another danger waiting just beyond the door. Neither spoke of what came next, but both felt it coming all the same. The valley did not forget what had happened at the cabin door. By afternoon, the silence carried weight again, thicker than the snow piled along the fence rails. Word traveled fast in Old West towns, even when storms tried to smother it. A man choosing a side was noticed. A woman refusing to disappear was remembered. He worked without speaking, mending a loose shutter, checking the horses, moving as if routine could hold the world together. She watched from the doorway, wrapped tight, every breath a reminder of how close she was to the edge of her strength. Pain blurred time, fear sharpened it. You should rest, he said without looking back. I've rested enough, she replied. Rest didn't keep them from coming. He could not argue with that. The trail beyond the cabin had begun to show again, thin lines cutting through white. The storm had given them a day at most. After that, there would be nowhere left to hide. He knew the men who had come would not let the matter drop. They were bound to orders and pride, both harder to break than bone. She stepped out onto the porch despite the cold. The air burned her lungs, but it cleared her head. She looked north, then south, measuring distances the way her people always had. You can still send me away, she said quietly. Before they return, he turned then, his eyes dark. You wouldn't make it far like this. I've made it this far. He heard the truth in that and the cost behind it. Inside, the cabin felt different now, smaller, as if the walls themselves were listening. He packed supplies without being asked. Bandages, dried meat, ammunition counted twice. Each item placed with care, with the knowledge that some would not be enough. She sat at the table, watching his hands. Strong hands, careful hands. Hands that had held her through pain without asking for anything in return. That frightened her more than the men outside. You don't owe me, she said. I know. Then why are you preparing like this is your fight? He stopped, the question striking deeper than the threat outside. Because once you see something wrong and turn away, he said slowly, you don't ever stop turning. Her chest tightened, not from broken ribs this time. She understood that kind of turning. She had lived it, watched it hollow people out until nothing was left but obedience. There was a knock at the door before either of them could speak again, not hard, not threatening, almost polite. They froze. He lifted his rifle but did not point it. She stood despite the pain, her knife hidden but ready. Fear passed between them, shared and unspoken. When he opened the door, a boy stood there, barely more than 16, cheeks red from cold. He wore the mark of Pine Hollow, the look of someone who had learned too young how to survive by choosing the safer side. They're gathering, the boy said quickly. Down by the storehouse. Talking about taking her before nightfall. Who sent you? He asked. The boy swallowed. No one, just thought you should know. The door closed gently. The warning lingered like smoke. She exhaled slowly. There it is, he nodded. The past catching up, the present demanding blood or surrender. You could still leave, he said, though the words felt heavier now. Take one of the horses. Head west through the ridge. It's rough, but they won't follow fast. And you? She asked. I'll draw them off. The idea struck her like a blow. No, I won't trade my life for yours, he met her gaze. That's not what this is. That's exactly what it is. The space between them closed. Not by steps, but by truth. He could see fear there, raw and bright, tangled with something else neither of them had named. He lifted a hand and let it fall. Touch carried consequences. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking despite her effort. "If they take me, it won't end with me." "It never does." "I know," he replied. "That's why I won't let them." The words settled between them, dangerous and binding. Outside, the sound of horses carried on the wind. More than before. Pine Hollow was choosing its comfort over justice, as it always had. He had known this place long enough to expect nothing else. She moved closer, every step costing her. "If we go," she said, "we go together." He shook his head. "You won't make it?" "I will," she insisted. "Or I won't, but I won't wait here." He wanted to argue, wanted to order her back into the chair, back into safety that did not exist. Instead, he saw her as she was, not broken but enduring. A survivor shaped by the same harsh land that had shaped him. A shout rang out from the valley below, then another. Time was gone. He handed her a coat thicker than her own, his mother's once, though he did not say that. She took it without question. Their hands lingered this time, neither pulling away. "If we're caught?" she said softly. "We won't be," he replied, though doubt edged the words. They stepped outside together. The cold bit hard, sharper than before. Tracks already formed behind them, betraying their path. He led her toward the ridge, away from the easier trail, toward ground that broke horses and men alike. Behind them, voices rose, closer now, certain. Her breath came ragged, each step a battle. He slowed for her, though it cost them distance. At one point she stumbled, pain stealing her strength. He caught her, pulling her close, holding her upright as he had the night before. "My ribs," she whispered again, but this time there was more than pain in her voice. There was fear of slowing him down. Fear of being the reason he fell. "I've got you," he said, and meant more than the moment. They reached the base of the ridge as the sun dipped low, turning snow to fire. There was no turning back now. Above them, the path narrowed, treacherous and exposed. Below, the men spread out, rifles glinting in the fading light. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the cost written plain across his face. The sacrifice already made. The one still coming. "If we survive this," she said, breath shaking, "nothing will be the same." He met her gaze, the world holding still around them. "I know." A rifle cracked below, the sound tearing through the valley. Snow exploded against the rock near their feet. He pulled her close, shielding her with his body as they pressed themselves against the ridge. Above them, the path offered one chance forward. Below, there was no mercy waiting. The land held its breath. And so did they. The shot echoed itself into nothing, swallowed by rock and snow. For a long moment, no second report followed. The men below shouted to one another, their voices sharp with frustration, dulled by distance and rising wind. He waited until the sound thinned, then moved. "Up," he whispered. She nodded, teeth clenched, and took the first step. Pain flared bright and blinding, but she forced it back. She had learned long ago that pain could be commanded, if only for a while. The ridge was narrow, the stones slick beneath snow, but the land knew her kind of feet. She placed them carefully, remembering lessons passed down by fires long gone. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Rock splintered behind them. He did not hesitate. He wrapped one arm around her, lifting part of her weight onto himself. Each step burned his lungs, his legs, but he did not slow. Years of cattle drives and winter crossings had taught him how to move when fear tried to freeze him in place. They reached a cut in the ridge just as dusk gave way to night. Wind roared through the gap, fierce and wild, hiding their movement. Beyond it lay a narrow ravine, steep and winding, invisible unless you knew where to look. She knew. She guided him with soft words, pointing where the snow lay thinner, where stone would hold. Behind them, the voices grew confused. Horses balked at the edge. Men cursed the land they did not understand. Then, finally, there was only wind. They did not stop until they reached the bottom of the ravine, where the earth dipped and curved like a sheltering hand. There, beneath an overhang of stone and pine, they collapsed together, breathless and shaking. For a long while neither spoke. Her ribs screamed with every breath, but she was alive. More than that, she was free of their reach. She leaned into him without thinking, her head resting against his chest. He held her, not carefully now, but fully, as if letting go might send her drifting back into danger. "We're clear," he murmured, though he waited another minute before believing it. She laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. "You said we wouldn't be—" "I hoped we wouldn't," he admitted. She tilted her head to look at him, eyes bright in the dim light. "Hope's a dangerous thing. So is living without it." They rested there until her breathing steadied and the shaking passed. When they rose, it was together. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound her ribs tighter, firm enough to help, gentle enough not to break her trust. She watched his hands, no longer flinching. They traveled through the night, slow but steady, following a path that would lead them beyond Pine Hollow's reach. By dawn, the land softened, opening into rolling ground dotted with trees that bent kindly toward the sun. They stopped near a creek where the ice had already begun to thin. He built a small fire while she rested, her back against a fallen log. Steam rose from the water as it warmed. The world felt quieter here, as if it had chosen to let them pass. "You could still turn back," she said, though her voice lacked conviction now. He shook his head. "Nothing left for me there." She studied him. "What was your name?" "Before you stopped using it." He considered, then spoke it aloud for the first time in years. It felt strange, like trying on an old coat. She nodded, accepting it without comment. She told him her name too, one shaped by her people, carrying the sound of wind through grass. He did not try to repeat it perfectly. She did not mind. It was enough that he listened. They stayed by the creek for 2 days while her strength returned. He hunted. She taught him which herbs eased swelling, which soothed the lungs. They spoke of the past in pieces, careful not to tear open wounds too fast. He told her about the family who had built the cabin, about the child who had never grown. She told him about her mother's songs and her father's laugh, about promises made by men who never intended to keep them. On the third morning, they heard hooves again. This time, neither reached for a weapon. An older man approached alone, riding slow, his posture cautious. He stopped well out of range and raised his empty hands. "I was sent," the man called, "to say they're done chasing." He dismounted and stood in the open. "Orders changed." "Too much trouble for what it's worth." She stiffened. He stepped slightly in front of her, but she touched his arm, steady. The man's eyes flicked to her, then away. "There are places farther west," he said. "Places where no one will bother you." He left without another word. The danger had passed, not with justice, but with distance. Out here, that was often enough. They moved on at a gentler pace, following the creek until it joined a wider river. There they found a small clearing, sheltered and rich with promise. The land felt right beneath their feet. They built a life slowly. A lean cabin first, then a proper one. She healed fully, though the scars remained. He learned to rest without waiting for disaster. They welcomed travelers when they came, offered shelter without questions. Sometimes she told stories by the fire, old Native American tales shaped by loss and resilience. Sometimes he listened in silence, the way the land did. Years later, when winter returned heavy and quiet, they sat together watching snow fall beyond the window. He held her hand strong and sure. "My ribs were already broken," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. He squeezed her fingers. "And you stood anyway." Outside, the frontier stretched wide and unforgiving. Inside, there was warmth. Love had not come easy. It had been earned through hardship, through choices made when it mattered most. And in that small place along a forgotten trail, peace finally found them both.